All right, so this is a very exciting moment for the panel to give you their insights. And anything like a panel discussion is not only you hear one perspective, you hear multiple perspectives from different angles to talk about the concept. So that's a whole purpose. And today our focus is CIAM. So how CIAM is working in the business. I will be the moderator, so I'm really humble to ask questions to those industry leaders and experts. I will try my best. And if I make any mistakes, you can correct me. I have a background. Before I let them speak, I'll just quickly talk about the format of this panel discussion. The first 5 minutes, you will have a chance to introduce yourself. Although we have Rosa, Aldo already talked about, but we want to hear more about your things. So you have 1 minute to quickly introduce yourself, who you are and what you do. Then we will pretty much have 25 minutes. I will ask questions. There are some very important questions I like to know as well to ask those experts. Then about 10 minutes, we will turn to you. You can ask questions in this panel. All right, everything good? And so let's do the quick introduction. Let's start from Rosa. Yeah, you can just quickly.
Rosa Caputo, KeyData Associates. That's all I'm going to talk to you now.
Wonderful. All right, Janet, you can.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Janet Ling from Loblaw. I'm not a cyber security expert. I'm not a risk expert. I'm not a CIAM expert. I lead the customer digital transformation journey for Loblaw.
Wonderful.
Right. So I'm Aldo Amoroso. I'm a senior pre-sales cloud security architect for Akamai, 25 years solutioning experience, primarily in security and global networking.
That's the mic drop right now, right? Good evening. My name is Jeff McGrath. I want to thank Bryan and the panel for inviting me here. Glad to be here. I'm the Director of Customer Identity Access Management Strategy at Royal Bank. I have about 25 years experience as well in identity and security. I have kind of a unique perspective in that I've had the opportunity to kind of work from all different angles, both as a customer, started off as a software company with Entrust, integrating and architecting, designing, implementing security solutions, both on the PKI side as well as the identity side. I've been on the customer side, working with Government of Canada, Government of Ontario on various projects. And I've also been in the integrator side, spent time at 2Keys as well as Deloitte. So I'm hoping that perspective, that holistic perspective helps me to better understand, the issues and the requirements of what our folks at Royal Bank are trying to do and be able to kind of build those bridges to be able to develop those innovative solutions.
All right, wonderful. All right, so it's my turn to ask questions. It's a wonderful time to interview them. And oftentimes I'm on the other side of the table, they interview me, right? And I have a little bit background on the architecture side. So I was a director of product development. So I'm working with a lot of developers, architecture. How many architects in the group right now? Okay, so for any architect, you're probably familiar with, there's a ZACMA framework. So ZACMA framework means, it's also, to me, it's a learning process. It's a learning framework. For any new concept, for example, today, say CIAM. If you're not very familiar with that, if you want to get hands on that and learn and give a little bit deep diving, you need to use the Akamai framework. That will be a good reference. Although I don't want to bore you for all those details, but really, you only need to ask 6 questions, which is very basic. Anybody can ask. Those are who, when, what, where, how, why. So I will use this framework to ask this panel. The first question about CIAM, not Raptors or other things about CIAM, is a who. So who do you think need to be involved as a key stakeholders in the CIAM project? We don't have a specific order. Anyone can jump in there. Okay.
So I'll start.
Go, Aldo.
Okay. So here's my take. Definitely marketing, because they're the folks that are going to understand. We're going to collect this data. What do we need to know about this data to execute an effective marketing campaign? I kind of gave an example earlier. That's the first group.
Okay.
The second one is compliance. Gave an example that just because you collect the data and you have the right to do one thing with it, does not give you the right to do multiple things with that. And if anybody's familiar with the $50 million fine that Google got with under GDPR, it was exactly that. The third one is legal. They need to come up with the language to figure out what are your, when someone offers you a piece of information, what terms and conditions are they going to accept? Got two more. Security, as you make the decision to move all your identities to a third-party cloud, what checks and balances need to be there. And I'm going to put in the last one, the infrastructure folks. If you're holding, say, 2 million identities internally, you're going to have to get their buy-in, and how are we going to transition these over to the cloud? So those are kind of the big five for me.
All right.
Little shout out to the architects in the room as well, right? So we're not trying to build one-off type of solutions. We need to have our architects be able to chart out the plan, right? Chart out our path. So you may have a specific use case that you want to be able to tackle, right? But you want to be able to leverage that stack, that platform, to be able to provide greater capabilities, more capabilities as those use cases are starting to add to the solution.
Okay, Janet.
I will say, number one, your chief customer officer.
Customer officer.
Okay.
Yep.
If you have one, if you don't have one, you're representative of each business. So in our case, we have 10 lines of business across Loblaw companies. We have financial services, we have pharmacy, healthcare, we have retail. You need a representative from each business unit to represent their business, to define one customer seamless journey. And then, of course, the security by design, the compliance by design, the architect, the smart brains, everybody. And a trusted partner that you wanted to partner with.
All right.
And
Yeah.
a governance model that
Okay.
somebody can drive the enterprise coming together.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Rosa, you have anything?
Nothing more to add. I think we covered it all.
Yeah, again, just to reiterate the point here, this
Yeah.
is not a technology play, right?
Right.
It's not a risk and compliance play, right? You need to have both your business stakeholders as well as your technology stakeholders.
Wonderful. So at least we hear 5, 6, 7 groups of people. But my next question, who owns that? So many stakeholders. Who owns CIAM project? Who's responsible for that?
Want to jump in there?
I'm going to defend my customers here. RBC or Loblaws.
Well, you're obviously, I'll say this, you want to have your senior leaders on that, right? You want to have some organizational alignment, right, to be able to really push those capabilities and requirements platform through. If you're looking to, again, have a technology play or trying to address a specific use case or requirement, you're going to have some challenges, some headwinds, some stalling there. So if you can go and elicit the support and sponsorship of the senior folks, both business and technical, right, you'll be able to kind of push through that.
All right.
So I've seen two scenarios, two practices. Number one is as a customer-centric company, it's owned by the customer digital transformation lead. The second scenario, it's owned by the security lead and security practice. I've seen both. Depends how that works in your organization. What is the focus? What is your technology strategy in your organization? It might fit either way, but I think I've seen those two scenarios. In my particular case, we fit that under the customer digital transformation journey, and it's because our Loblaw strategy is customer-centric. Customer goes first. CIAM is there to protect customer, but we also want to ensure as we protect our customer identity, we also create a seamless customer experience that easy for customer to come to single sign-on, to cross-sell, to achieve what we wanted to service to our customer.
Wonderful. Rosa, any?
So I think that who pays and who's accountable overall might be two different things. I think someone from the customer side of the business definitely would own it. Customer growth, how we service customers, really important. But IT plays a big role, and there's so many stakeholders within IT that need to come together. But it is, I must say, one project where IT is not the owner this time around. It's the business.
Final word there for some context and perspective. I'm taking my strategies and I'm going to Bruce Ross. Bruce Ross is our CIO. He's our number 2. So I'm having him review those. I'm having him approve those, having him, action the specific resources and leaders who are going to be able to support that.
Wonderful. All right. So that's a perfect answer from, I also can see different perspective. It really depends on the scenarios as well, and the company structure, the culture as well. Next question. 1, the time. So at which stage a company need to consider a CIAM project?
I think a company should always look at how they can better service the client and that end user experience. And if they have data that shows that they're not attracting the clients that they want to attract, or that they're making it difficult for their clients to do business in their environment, or that there are some apprehension because of the lack of security around the platform, I think it's always good to assess and determine, what needs to be done to improve the way you do business with your consumers. And sometimes you might want to gather data when the customers log on, to say how can we improve the service. But, organizations that are serving external clients always need to be on top of how do we improve that end user experience? How can we make it easy for customers to do business with us and to grow our business within the context of security and privacy and all these other areas that are not just regulatory, but they're important to the consumer themselves.
All right. Wonderful. Anyone want to add on that?
I would say it depends on the maturity of the company's security and customer digital transformation journey. Once you get to the point that business will really want to push your security maturity and to drive the digital transformation, that naturally it will happen.
All right. Cool. Yeah.
So my thoughts on this are, we talked a little bit about the digital economy and how fast it's growing, and so the sooner an organization makes a decision that they want a piece of that, the earlier they should get started with their CIAM strategy, so that so they can get the right message to the right person, in the right context, in the right format to transact with them.
I echo that, right? As soon as possible, right? You may have a specific, defined, small use case, right? But you want to be able to plan that out. So the earliest you can kind of plan out that strategy, maybe put in a platform that you can build up on. You're going to set yourself up for success, as opposed to having to refactor that as, trying to put point solutions in there, right?
All right. Something like a CIAM by design, right? So at the earliest stage, as much as early as possible. Okay. My next question about what kind of things do you need to include? The major functionality or major elements you need to include in a CIAM solution. I know Aldo kind of touch on that one, but I want to hear from the panel as well. Yeah.
You want to review there, right?
So yeah, so I think I called them the big 5. Just some context. We did some training in Vegas last week. And so it was a 2-day session. We talked a lot of different things. The one feedback that I heard from a lot of different customers, which was surprising, they didn't want to talk about features, functionality, attributes. They wanted to talk about compliance. Like we had a section where we talked about the Canadian Privacy Act, HIPAA, GDPR. So if we talk about the big 5, but if there's one where I see organizations struggle with, is understanding compliance. Like, let me ask the audience a question. In your business today, do you know whether the Canadian Privacy Act applies? PIPEDA applies or the provincial privacy laws apply? Does everybody know? Cool. Okay, great. We've got a couple. But that's where I see folks struggle.
I was just going to say, it's all about choice, really. There's a lot of choice there. So you need to be able to build in that choice, right? So you need to be able to create innovative, secure customer interactions, right? And provide the client the choice to be able to share that data with you and control over it. Control with regards to how they're going to be able to interact with you, the channel that they want to use, be able to provide a consistent transaction interaction, if you will, through those various channels, right? And I think you touched on that as well. You need to be able to do that securely, from an authentication layer right through the data, and also do it at scale. And that's really, there's a big significant difference as opposed to an enterprise IAM type of solution. You really need to be able to ramp that up as you grow.
Mm-hmm. Or Janet, anything?
I would say security, yes, for sure, to protect your customer identity data. But I will also add the customer satisfaction, the seamless customer experience, and to understand different line of business requirements as well as different lines of business regulations, right? That's also very important. So for my case, we have the bank R3 requirements that we need to address. We have the healthcare. We also have the PCI compliance. So everything like the regulation also need to be included in the design framework.
All right. Okay, so that's what need to be included in a CIAM. So how many questions we already asked? One, who, and what? I will ask a how question. How do you know your CIAM project is successful? In a way, it's your successful measurement or KPI, whatever. So can you share any insights on that?
Everyone's looking at me. I'm the strategy guy, right? Well, you have a couple of different vectors here. You have customer engagement, right? So you're looking for uptake in registration. You're looking for the unification correlation of data. You're looking for how much extra information during that journey that you're being able to capture. You're looking from a security vector, right? So you're looking at the reduction or the percentage of nefarious transactions, breaches, issues, etc. Issues with that particular data, that particular access. And you're also looking from an operational standpoint too, right? Like, is there any kind of change in the password resets? Any change in, even I'll say the resource allocation, right? Within your project, within your team. CIAM is supposed to be able to automate, supposed to be able to make more efficient type of processes, right? Are we able to identify some redundancies here and be able to maybe move those resources and people around to be able to work on tasks that are a little bit more meaningful and important?
Okay, wonderful.
Well, we always like to measure the success of our projects, not just at the end, but phase by phase. And the best way that we found to do that is to determine where you are today and what you want to achieve, what your objectives are. And these are all really measurable things. By understanding what it is that you're trying to achieve, and if you can quantify that to whatever extent those objectives enable you to do that. And then at the end, measure how much you've achieved or measure how much you've moved the needle every phase. It's always good to do it phase by phase instead of, big bang at the end, because every phase contributes a little bit more to moving that needle. So, and success would be probably slightly different for each company. Depends on where you are today, where your gaps are with your CIAM environment and what it is that you're trying to achieve. But, the ultimate measure is, have you made it easier for clients to transact with your business? And ultimately, is your revenue growing as a result of that? Are you producing more sales? Are you having more transactions than what you had before? You're able to cross-sell easier. So all of these measures are quantifiable, and it depends on what exactly the organization is trying to achieve by the program. So I guess success is measured by how much you've moved the needle from where you are today to where you want to get.
Wonderful. Great insight.
I think it's very easy for us to measure, like from both the customer journey and the security perspective, right? From security perspective, we know before the CIAM journey that the attacks, the measurements, the cyber attacks to our customer accounts, we know we can measure after that. After the CIAM journey, does it go up? Does it go down? And does the hackers goes away? Right. That's number one. So security perspective. From your customer journey perspective, without measured, think about a case someone mentioned that you have to log in the site 5 times, right? So in our case, our Joe Fresh website, PC Express, PC Financial, our healthcare, digital pharmacy, all our Loblaw customers, they need to log in 5-10 times to each of the website. Tomorrow, single sign-on. Once everybody gets on CIAM, log in 1 time. The only, for different security purpose, security sensitivity, and for regulations, you might ask customer to step up to do the MFA. But much easier, seamless customer experience. Once you log in once, we know who you are. We know what product you have. We just route you through our website with the trusted token. So from measurements perspective, we can measure the customer login time. We can measure how longer they stay with us. It's totally, completely measurable.
Wonderful.
So my thoughts on that would definitely measure your registrations, your logins. Your performance matters every step of the way. Also, the attributes you collect. So for example, if you've got 1 million customers and you start off with 10 million attributes, over time, are you collecting more? Because you're going to need more and more information to put it through your MarTech integration. And then when you execute your MarTech integration and you run your campaigns, how successful are your campaigns? So kind of, I like to think of it that you want to measure the life cycle of it.
Mm-hmm.
And final thought on that, it needs to be quantifiable, right? You need to have some measurements. You're going to run into some headwinds in these CIAM projects, right? So you need to be able to show the value, both the business value, technological value, right? So if you can show that, you're going to get a lot more currency and trust, be able to kind of push that project through. You know, these KPIs need to be simple, they need to be understood, right? They need to be measurable, they need to be actionable, right? So if you keep that in mind and able to show that to your, you know, your senior leaders, you'll be able to kind of push through.
Wonderful. Okay, there's a question there. I really appreciate the insight on measure and quantify.
So here's the business strategy, right? If you have a happy customer, if you create a seamless customer experience, if you drive your customer engagement with a company, if you simplify their life, they stay with a company, then eventually your revenue will grow, right? So that's why customer centricity is so important, right? Like you might not see a direct business benefit right away, but once you drive the engagement with customer, they stay with a particular company. In our case, we offer multiple line of business, right? We wanted to keep our customer with Loblaws. We sell them food. We provide financial management. We provide them healthcare. We drive the engagement with customer with our biggest loyalty program in Canada. They stay with us. The benefit will come.
All right. And actually, before we go to your question, let's finish my question first. Sorry about that one. And we do have about 5 to 10 minutes for you to ask questions. And there are a couple of questions I also like to get your insights related to how. And So we mentioned that how do you measure the success, which is a big topic, and each line of business could be a different, and you have your specific KPI as well. But the panelists gave a very good perspective on different angles. And the next question is still related to how long does a typical CIAM project take? Is that like
longer than you think it's going to?
So definitely it's not a project, it's like a forever cycle.
I would just say that what seems obvious to some people, especially on the ground, may not seem so obvious to people as you go through and have different conversations and start going through their journey, right? So start early, right? Really try to, socialize the idea, the benefits of that, not just necessarily within that specific use case that you're trying to work in, but through the various different stakeholders, right? Get their buy-in, get their support, because you're going to need that as you run into headwinds and the inevitable headwinds and issues as you start to try to implement.
Okay. Any other song?
Well, I think it depends on what you're trying to do, where you are today, how much you're trying to accomplish, and the complexity of the project. When we service a client, how long it takes to do something is always dependent on what is the scope. What is the scope of work that needs to be done? How much do we want to achieve? And over what period of time? Because you can always shorten the time by doubling the resources. But in an organization, usually it's the change and how much the organization can absorb change. In this particular case, how much are you trying to achieve? How much dependency there is on the IT work that needs to be done? How much data you need to gather? There's so many different components that come to play. And the customer side, the marketing side, the business side, the technology and privacy, compliance. There's so many different silos that all need to be involved. So it's hard to say, isn't, I don't think it's a slam dunk. It's 2-3 months of effort. It may take 2-3 months to get this new IT system up and running, but there's a lot more work that needs to be done beforehand. There's a lot of work that needs to be done by the business side. So it depends on scope.
Okay, understood. Yeah.
So it depends on how strategically the organization think what CIAM is, okay? So if you wanted to use CIAM just to use for credentials logins, I've seen that we launch a product integrated with our system in 3 months. I've seen vendor proposal 10 weeks. But if you wanted to, if you really wanted to make CIAM a strategic platform to enhance your customer journey, we have a 3-year roadmap, right? We have the multi-phases of CIAM, the on-premise, the cloud, and the future biometric. It's a full blow of roadmap, 3-year plus. So it really depends on your need and your vision of CIAM in your organization.
Okay, wonderful. I have one last question before I turn to the audience to ask questions, and you will get the first question to ask because I owe you one. And we talk about the success, but how bad can CIAM project go? So I mean, are there some common mistakes or pitfalls or the bad things you saw that experienced? Can you share some lesson learned?
So I kind of talked about this a couple of times. I work with a lot of different organizations as they collect information through the customer journey. They'll collect an email address to show as a product gets shipped from the factory to their home, and then it gets used for other things. And they get that home address and they use it for other things. So the big pitfall I see is as organizations collect the information, they don't necessarily apply the right compliance and consent to it and get themselves in the penalty box. So Sorry?
Simpsing. Once they have the data, they are simpsing.
I see it all the time. And the last part of it is it needs to be secure. Customer identities, they're big value in the on the dark web. Electronic health records are like worth 20 to 50 times more than what a U.S. credit card is worth. So you need to protect it. So security and compliance are the two that I see folks. If I'll throw a third one in there, one more. Just the other one I've seen is I've seen some organizations think about using their IAM for their CIAM, and initially.
Were you looking at me when you said that?
No. So initially it kind of sounds good on the whiteboard, right? Maybe even in the boardroom might sound like a good idea, but they're two different beasts. If you think about it, there's only 2 companies in the U.S. with over 1 million employees, right? So if you're if you're trying to use an IAM solution, chances are your vendors haven't scaled it for millions of users because there aren't very many customers in that space. IAM is typically measured in the hundreds of thousands. CIAM is measured in the millions and maybe tens of millions. So it'll start out like a good idea, but as soon as you get any tractions, your IAM implementation may fail, which may leave you in the penalty box.
Where I think these projects could go wrong or start off on the wrong track is when organizations try to develop the solution on their own, as opposed to using commercial solutions. I think that it may seem like a good idea because they can design it just the way they want it, but the commercial solutions will be there for a long time. They have roadmaps, and they have teams and teams and hundreds of developers always looking at how to improve these solutions. And so what I find is after just a few years, they're out of date and they don't have the capability that they want, and they really lost the investment that they put in it in the first place. So our recommendation is always to go with commercial solutions for the success of the project.
I'll say start small, right? So I think that if you take on a large, really complex problem, you can get really bogged down. And I think that that's one of the major reasons why a lot of the old enterprise IAM type of initiatives failed, right? They really tried to take on too much, and it took too long. They lost the will, right? And they lost the support of the people. So, and their stakeholders that they need to be able to kind of get through those moments. So if you can take a small, well-defined, measurable type of use case, right? Use that as a way to obviously have a strategy and a plan to be able to meet, an organizational enterprise type of strategy, but solve that one problem, develop some currency, some organizational trust, right? Be able to flex the muscles of your team, both on the implementation side as well as the project side and business analysis side, right? And then use that as a stepping stone as you move forward.
My advice will be choose a trusted partner that who understands your requirements and who's willing to grow with you.
Wonderful. All right, cool. Now it's your turn, and you can ask any question to our experts, and I will reserve that one for you first.
Thank you very much for your great panel discussion. I have a 2-part question. So one on the employees and their, that just wasn't discussed as much as I would have hoped in terms of communication. So using security to help them communicate. So whether it's an infrastructure project in terms of building highways or whether it's like a shipping project, I'm thinking on that level, as well as centralization when it comes to logging in, for instance, for retailers with their customers. In terms of IP, do you have concerns about that when it comes to cybersecurity? So in saying that there's several different logins for Joe Fresh and whatnot, but then when you create one login, doesn't that also create new potential problems because it's just a centralization of a lot of data that might be sensitive? Thank you.
Anyone can.
I think in that case it will be secure instead of it will be much secure, centrally managed, instead of siloed managed with different standard. Some of them might not have a security standard when it was implemented. So I think from a security perspective, definitely much better. And from user experience perspective, it's no-brainer, right? Like we have had complaints from our customer. They don't even understand this is one company. So what is the loss from the company benefit perspective?
The only thing I'd add to that is you can certainly, say, use a social login for initial login, but then if they want to execute a particular transaction, you can do something like step-up authentication, so take it the next step. So certainly that's an option that we see.
Absolutely, right? As the risk of that transaction or that access rises, you want to put different controls on that, right? And it's much easier to do when you have one ID, right, that's mapped, right, to your other IDs or credentials too. I'd also say there's a threat vector too if you have multiple accounts, right? So someone now has multiple ways to be able to kind of attack and get access to your data, be able to execute transactions, right? As opposed to you being in control of that one.
It's also easier to have one good, strong password than to have to remember 5 different ones that you may have to write down, or maybe the password is the same anyway, so you're no more secure. But I agree with the other panelists, Aldo and Jeff, that if you need the additional security, you can add a 2-factor or some other token, depending on the value or the type of transaction that you have to execute. So I think the good, strong, centralized repository is more secure.
I was gonna say or Anita was gonna say no password, right? No password in there, right? Depending on what the risk of that transaction is.
What I was going to add to that is that when we talk about CIAM, I think we often forget that it's not just one solution. It's actually an ecosystem of solutions that provide the best protection, right? So your entry point or your gate is one single gate, but then you have layers of protection. So your auth, which could be passwords or biometric, hopefully it's a stronger auth, is one layer. Then you have your adaptive layer, which sets up contextual scenarios, right? Are you logging in from China when you always log in from Canada? Are you logging in at 3 o'clock in the morning when you always log in during the day? And having that to set up beacons or alerts to do something else. Even before that, having things like, at your WAF layer, bot protection, AI protection. So AI looking in the dark web, is your password already breached? What do you do in that scenario? So these are layers of protection that form your CIAM approach and your ecosystem.
Correct.
And when you can centralize that, you can
ecosystem.
offer those layers, right? Yeah.
I would include like a fraud component to that as well as part of that ecosystem. So it's more than just CIAM, it's all the parts around it, including step up and looking for malicious activity on accounts.
My question is with regard of social login. As much as is, I think it's echoing my voice, sorry. As much as it's convenient, how safe do you think it is? Because I don't want to use my RBC account credentials, for example, to log onto another account. And I don't think there are enough regulatory. I mean, that we're moving very fast, but there isn't enough regulatory around to address these issues.
And I think Ananda was inferring that, right? It depends on the risk, right? Depends on what you're trying to do, right? You want to be able to, create as least friction as possible, in the early part of your journey, right? If someone wants to get some information on a website, wants to get access to a newsletter, whatever, maybe that social login is appropriate, right? But the CIAM needs to be able to support that identity through its life cycle, right?
Mm-hmm. If you're accessing medical records, I don't think you want to use your social login. So I agree with the last comment. It depends on what the nature of the transaction is, what's appropriate.
It's a great way. So if you're attracting folks to your website, and I'm going to give the pet store analogy. Someone comes to my website and I see them looking at my dog food that I have for sale, and I want to get them to register. Maybe I offer them a coupon saying, hey, if you register to my newsletter, I'll give you a $10 coupon, right? And so that's referred to as a light registration. You can send them the coupon via email. They get it, they open it, offer to ship it to their home if they give you their home address. So now they come to your website, and perhaps that could be a situation where you could use a social login. Really, all they're offering is one piece of information. But if they decide to do financial transactions, then that's a time and a place where you want to execute step-up authentication, right?
And some identity proofing, right? Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I'm trying to grab the foot on information security. So, for identity and access management is there already. So, are we trying to have a kind of more secure environment? Because as we are, going on to the future, we need to have more robustness in our security. But when we have a word like customer CIAM, which is starting with customer, are we glamorizing security or trying to add robustness to this security? And number two, why do we need the kind of CIAM when we already can fortify IAM? What's the value in adding just word when technology itself is, is not evolving as we seem to? Because authentications is the actually root of identifying the original, the person. So if you understood my questions, I'm sorry with the words, but you guys are expert, right? Okay.
Yeah, so I think what I heard was, why not use an IAM solution to address CIAM? Is that the question? So couple of things. Scale is a big one. Most IAM solutions are built for thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands. We talked about this earlier. I think there are 3.8 billion people in the world digitally connected, 33 billion Internet of Things. So an IAM solution, a traditional IAM solution, is not going to scale into the millions or perhaps tens of millions. So that's kind of the first one.
I'll jump in there. Maybe your vacuum cleaner is going to log in, right? Your vacuum cleaner, your fridge. Right, they want to be able to log in and get, execute some sort of transaction, right? How are we going to support that, right? That's a massive scale. Sorry, go ahead. Mark, your thunder there.
No, so scale is one, performance is the other. As you add more and more attributes into a traditional IAM, you may not get the performance that you're looking for. And so we know in the digital economy, if the performance is not there, you're going to run into a high level of abandoned sessions. So the two big ones are scale, I'll talk about performance, and also integration. Most IAM services, they're going to integrate with your HR system, maybe your ERP, but a robust CIAM system is going to support a lot of different integrations, whether it be MarTech, to your help desk, to your bricks and mortar stores. So it's just a little bit of a different use case. Like similar concept, it does authentication, but it does a lot of other different things.
Just a second, on this, you are saying like scalability. So just because there is a large number of participations because of growth in populations or because of technology in crossing our life, the gist is same. Like you need to make sure the person who wants access gets the one. So the gist is like authentications. Just because there are more participations, why do you think we need another word? When the technology is static, the same thing, why we want to glamorize with the word?
So you're right. It's an extension of identity and access management, right? This is not some sort of new domain, right? But I think what it is it's a focus on the specific requirements and needs and capabilities for the customer specific. We're talking about scale. We're talking about choice. We're talking about power over their data, consent management, exactly. Who's going to share, who's going to access that particular data, right? So the new CIAM type solutions are kind of hardwired and built for this, right? They're specific, creating capabilities to meet those kind of requirements and needs. But it's not like cracking a new egg, right? It's not a new, discovery here. It's just an extension of identity and access management with a different focus.
So if I can add to that. So really all an identity management system does is automate 4 key processes. Your onboarding process, when someone new starts with a company, offboarding when someone leaves the company, cross-boarding when someone transfers, and access certification when you have to do a validation for Sarbanes-Oxley or whatever review you want to do for audit purposes. That's all those systems do. What we're talking about here is how you manage your customer preferences and priorities and how they do business with your site. It's a totally different application. So you're not going to get the same functionality in an IAM solution, what you need to manage your customer.
Yeah, I'll give you some experience from corporate perspective. Your IAM integrates with your HR system, with your sourcing system, with your like Workday, Fieldglass email system, right? Your customer CIAM is very focused on your customer journey. It's very focused on your mobile experience. For IAM, you less care about your customer experience, your mobile experience.
Hi, thank you for the fantastic information. I have actually 2 questions and continue with the social login. My question is how, like in privacy perspective, do you think that using the social login, like if I need to go to banking services, so if I'm using my Facebook, let's say credential, if I'm went to like say RBC, then I went to CIBC, definitely Facebook will have the information that I'm looking for some financial services, and they will use this information, and maybe they will sell this information for other clients or other customers of their. And other thing, how far or do you think that your clients are aware of collecting these data, and how far the analytics of these data, analysis of these data for the marketing purpose? Are they aware enough for this collecting, and how these data are using to offer them more services?
You want to jump in there?
Yeah, sure. So, okay. So every tool has a purpose, right? So I see social login as like a light registration tool. You want to make it fast and easy for someone to do an initial login or create an account. So that's where I see social login come into play. Then as you engage more and more with the customer, if it's a financial transaction or perhaps it's a healthcare transaction, maybe you want to execute step-up authentication. So definitely social login is not the only answer, but it's part of the answer. The second part of it, I think I've mentioned this a few times, even if you do social login, you need to get consent from the actual user, that if you go to their Facebook or their LinkedIn, what information you're going to capture from that particular account.
You mean they're just blanketly accepting to share data without realizing what the ramifications of that are?
So tracking consent is a big deal, and it's going to be a bigger deal. When a situation pops up, and I'll talk a little bit about GDPR, I think in their first year they handed out $62 million in fines. I converted that to US dollars. And so part of the issue, as you're collecting this information, if someone raises a flag, Google was a great example. On May 25th, 2018, there were 2 complaints on Google the day GDPR became mandatory. The big issue was when folks were registering their Android phones, Google was doing something else with the data, right? And I think it was 50 million euros or 57 million US. So the answer to your question is, if folks don't get good at this, there's going to be a big stick coming behind it. That's just my take.
So yeah, so with regards to access to, bank accounts and stuff like that, you won't be able to do it with a social login, right? You're thinking of a different part of that customer journey, which is like a prospect, right? Someone wants some information. You want to start a relationship with them, right? But as they move from that prospect to being a customer, right, there's a whole identity proofing process. They need to prove to us who they are, right? We have regulations that dictate that, KYC, AML, et cetera, that they need to go through that a social login just won't cut it, right? With regards to, control over their data, I would say that that's significantly changing. If you look at research between even millennials and Gen Zers, there's like some data that says they're much more aware of how their data is being shared and want much more control over that, right? New specifications and standards that are coming out. I'm thinking UMA, user managed access and stuff like that, to be able to, better support that, right? That type of use case, more controlled, easier to control your access to your data, who's sharing it, who has access to it, and to be able to revoke that, control that data.
To his point, as the holder of the information or the controller of the information, you have to track that consent, because some fellow may come up and say, I never agreed to that, and you need to be able to produce the day the fellow clicked OK, what version did he accept, and along the way, did he decide to unaccept it? So keeping track of consent is a key requirement.
All right. Okay. So speaking of the time, and I also want to leave some time for networking. So one last thing, anything you want to say, because we want to wrap up this when we talk about several questions like who, what, when, how, all those things. Any final words to people like here? So from your background, any tips, last tip for people to take a CIAM journey? Everyone has a choice, have an opportunity.
I'm just happy to be here. That's it.
Collaboration. So that's.
Well, not being a security expert, just be here to share our experience and to listen to some of the experts talking about other practices in the business cases. It feels like everybody's facing the same challenge. And as you said, this concept started a year ago. I think we are the very, very one of the earliest leaders that we started a year and a half ago. We went through a few phases. We have a strong roadmap, and then we are going to lead the rest of the CIAM journey. I'm very excited and proud of my team.
Wonderful. Okay.
Shout out to Loblaws.
All right. And
maybe I'll just echo the point that Anita was just making there. We talked about having small use cases that are well defined that we can execute. We talked about trying to have a platform, right, that you can be able to leverage and use. So maybe on that point, I think if you're going and looking for a CIAM solution, you want to be able to have a platform that's going to be able to meet your typical core capability and requirements, right? Whether it be the self-service registration and user management, whether it be the authentication factors, single sign-on federation, the out-of-the-box type of multi-factor that you're going to be able to leverage, right? But have the ability to extend, right? To be flexible, using open standards, right? Using the protocols and best practices that are out there, so that you're not stuck in a box. That as things change, as they always change, different approaches, different technologies, you'll be able to leverage and use those technologies as opposed to having to refactor, right, and starting from scratch.
Wonderful. All right.
And my advice, my last piece, understand your requirements really well, document them, make sure that you get all the stakeholders to provide input across the business, marketing, your customer service center. Understand what they all are across the full spectrum of your organization, and bring in the right technology to address those. Don't try and go at it alone.
Okay, good.
So when I think of CIAM, I think of all the things you can do with the data, and don't think short term. Think about how once you get the data, you've got consent, you've got it secured. Think about how are you going to integrate with your help desk, how are you going to integrate with your CRM, how are you going to integrate with your bricks and mortar store, how are you going to integrate with mobile, how are you going to integrate with your loyalty card, and then think about 5 or 6 other things that you haven't done with, you haven't thought of. So that's kind of the advice I would give. don't box yourself in. Make sure whatever solution you pick has a strong API background so that you can integrate services to it very easily.
All right.
Perhaps invite Aldo during that process as well. Help you guide through your journey.
You just make our 3-year journey become 5-10 years.
And Rosa too, of course.
And also network with those experts, get their insights. You have 30 minutes at least today to do that. All right, let's give a round of applause to this elite panel.